Hey everybody, and welcome to the fourth and final video about the basics of working with Marvelous Designer. Now we're going to continue on with explaining the things that we haven't passed in the or went over in the last three videos. If you haven't watched those, go ahead and check those out as well. But in this one, we're going to continue and try to show some more options and how we can use them to create some more interesting models. So the last time in the last video, we basically made this model. So now we're gonna move towards something like this, or better yet, something that's going to be in the middle of this, and we're going to cut this thing into two different pieces. One is going to be how to get a piece that is going to be similar to a Chesterfield, and the other one is going to be how to get this sort of a pattern embedded into your model. So let's go ahead and start here by, first of all, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this, Control C, Control V, just so I have something to work on. Put it over here, and this thing is good as a base. All right, let's just see where it's at. There we go. Move it in here, and great. All right, we can start from there. What I'm going to do is right away, I'm going to select this piece over here. I'm going to right click and I'm going to reset the 3D alignment. But before I do that, I need to unfreeze it. So now when I right click, this will be as an possible option, reset 3D arrangement. Like this. All right, that's good. Now I need to move this thing down, move it to the front, and there we go. So as I can see, I actually have this thing as one continuous piece like this. But let's say that maybe you had this thing cut up, or maybe you want to cut it up. So the way to do that, as I still haven't shown you that option, is you go over, you select where you want to cut your fabric, you go left click or right click, and you can go on cut, or you can go with cut and sew. So if you go and just cut it, this thing will split it in here. And if you take a look at the 3D space, it's really not connected there, but there we go. As you can see, the ends are not connected. But if I go back and just instead of doing it like that, I can just go ahead and cut and sew. In that case, it will give you this distance here, but when I go ahead and remove them from one another, you're gonna see that that thing is sewn. All right, so that's the case when I have two that are basically different edges. But what happens if I want to go ahead and take these two and make them into one? So in that case, I select the first, hold on shift, select the other one, right click, and you go to merge. Now take into account one fact: as soon as you merge, this thing will move together, and this thing now just got merged into one piece. But now you have to take another thing into account. Previously here we had this middle part that was an internal line. Now this is no longer red like these, but instead it's this bluish tint. This means that this line in here is no longer a line that's basically put into the geometry as an internal line, but instead it's just a baseline. The difference between a baseline and an internal line is that if you take a look at the geometry, if you go in here and take a look at the geometry, you're going to notice that where that internal line is, we don't have that line going down the road or going down the polygons. So if you have baselines, those are there just to help you with the shape. they don't change the actual look of your model, which can be very helpful at certain things, especially when you are trying to plan out something. So to do that, you can always, for example, if you want to have a just empty plane here, if I want to get rid of those internal lines, what I can do is in here I can right click and then convert to a baseline. Then I can right click here and convert this thing to a baseline. So now if I go ahead and recheck my geometry, you're going to see I no longer have those lines. But as you can see, at the same time, all the sewing is still available, and even these vertices or endpoints are actually still around on my model. But I cannot select the base lines like this. If I want to select my baselines and either remove them, then I would have to go in over here where at the top here and choose the trace option. So the trace will allow me to select my internal lines, or not internal but baselines, and I can remove them. So I can click delete and that will remove it. I can actually go ahead, hold on shift while I'm selecting so I can remove multiples. I can also, the other thing I can do here is go in here and remove these endpoints like this, so I end up with just one unobstructed big polygon. Now here's the interesting thing. Since I've done that, I no longer have those endpoints, but if I go ahead and now simulate, the simulation still runs just as it did when we had all of those lines. So all of those points that were used for the sewing are still active, and it still does, there we go, it still does the simulation in the right and correct way. So this is a good thing to know. Now what I'm going to do here is Control Z one more time, and now we're going to prep this thing up so we can get the shape that we want over here. So for this, what I can notice now is that these lines are going across from each other, and here at the bottom they go down, but for now I'm just going to create one that's going to be like this. We're going to go and create a internal line. So click here, and now when you want to do a 45-degree line, if you hold down shift while you're dragging out, this thing will snap at the 90 or 45-degree angle. So as you can see, like this. So I want to get this thing to be something like this. Click and enter. As you can see, now it didn't finish, but if I go again and just click all the way down to the line and now enter, this will create an internal line. Awesome. So now I want to make an entire array of these, or an entire mesh. So I'm just gonna go Control C, Control V, then hold down Shift again just so it stays in the same axis, and right click. This will allow me to choose how far or how spaced I want these things to be. Since I don't really have a set amount for the spacing, I'm just gonna use 20. And the thing here is that when you're doing something like this, you want to do a bit of math, just so you know how much you should space these, because this thing is basically sewn to itself. So when it gets to the end, it's going to have a bit of a different type of sewing. So you'll see it right now. As soon as I'm finished with this, there we go. I'm gonna go select this, Control C, Control V one more time on this side, right click, again 20, there we go. All right, awesome. So now what I want to do first is I'm going to go ahead, select all of these lines that were just created. And if some of them are going over our shape, what we can do is we can right click on them and choose offset, or not offset, but extend trim to pattern outline. So if we click this, it's going to trim all of those lines so they're not going beyond it. Now, actually, before I do that, what I would want to do is, since we want to have this thing go in both sides, I'm going to go right click and actually let's do it like this. Right click. All right. Back to trying to select all of them. So I'm just gonna hold down Shift, and this is the annoying part. There we go. Oh, come on. So select them all. Hold down. Keep holding down Shift. Right click, and just go and choose the mirror paste option, something like this, and put it in there like that. Now, as you can see, we've just made a grid for us. So again, I can go ahead, select all of these. Now I want to trim this like we previously did, just so that I have all of these to extend trim to pattern outline. There we go. And now, if I go ahead and just simulate this, this is going to work just fine for the first type of model that we're trying to recreate. So let's see how this is going to work. Let's give it a second until it finishes. All right, doing a good job. And there we go. So this is the thing that I was telling you about previously. So the back side here, since it does need to have one side where it's gonna have a vertical sew for the parts to be matched up to itself. If we were doing this, we would have to do a bit of math to make sure that these lines are basically just continuous. So the distance here would have to be divided. I didn't really do that thing in this case, so that's why I have this mismatch, but it's not a big problem for now. So what I'm going to do is now leave this as it is, let it simulate just a bit more so it kind of settles down. I think that's enough. And now we're going to select this and freeze it. So for now, let's select both of these and just right click and clone over. Put it up here. Again, as always, if you see the cyan color here, just go down here and remove the linked editing. Once this thing is done, now we can unfreeze. And with this thing, let's just give it a bit more pressure. Try something like 20. Give it the other fabric that we created. There we go. And let's simulate it and see how this thing is gonna act up. All right, slowly starting to drape. The pressure is gonna start to work, and at the same time, this thing is going to start giving us some folds in here, I think. All right, yep, there we go. So if I take a look at the corners, very slightly, we have this thing. See, if I give it a bit more of the warp, there we go. Very slowly, it's starting to fill up. Now, if I want to see how this thing looks like, what I'm going to do is in the display, in the 3D garment, I'm gonna hide the internal lines, and this is how my model looks at the moment without those lines being in the way. Now this could be what I'm looking for, but it actually might not be, as if I'm trying to achieve this same result, I'm going to require to have these middle cut-ins here, or these middle holes. Now here's the thing. If you want to create these, you need to understand how they actually are made in the real world. And the way that these are actually crafted or manufactured is you have a base, which can be any sort of shape. Then you have the seating there, which is the cushion. And in the cushion, they cut in a small circle. So those small circles that we see here as holes are actually holes in the cushion. And then the fabric is put on top of the cushion, and this thing is basically being driven inside that hole. So thanks to that, and this fabric being driven inside that hole, what happens is that all the pressure from the fabric is being translated over to the seating, which in turn gives us these nice looking wrinkles around the holes. So how do we do that over here in MD? Well, not that hard, to be honest. So let's go ahead and create one more version of this. I'm going to select just my base and copy paste another version on this side. Give it a second to synchronize. I'm actually just gonna freeze the previous one just so it's not simulating. So freeze, and we have one more version down here, and pull this thing in like this. All right, so once we have this, what I can do is I can use these internal lines that I have created in here, and just add another internal eclipse or ellipse, and get in the middle in here like so, and just click here. All right, so the diameter. Now this diameter is going to be the size for the holes. So I can control to have a 1 centimeter big hole. I think this is going to be okay. And just click yes. All right. Now I want to take the same thing, copy paste. Put it in there. Copy paste, put one in there, and I want to have just these three in this manner. So I need how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so if we need 7, I'm just gonna click Control C, Control V, right click here, 1990s, it's probably 20. And I need 7 copies of this. Okay. I also want to select this one. Hold down Shift, select this one. Control C, Control V. Right click, so 20, and I also want 7 versions here as well. All right, let's check it out. Yep, everything looks just fine for now. All right, so I have those, but now the problem here that I'm having at the moment is that all of these internal lines that I have, I don't really need, because I don't want to keep those. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, select them all, All right. And as soon as I select them all, what I'm going to do is I can either delete them or I can turn them into baselines. But in this case, since I'm not really going to need them for anything else, I think I'm just going to go ahead and remove them. So delete. Wait for the synchronization to finish. And what we're left with is just this fabric with the holes in it. So let's select it, select the whole thing. Unfreeze, simulate for a second, just until it settles down. It should be very fast because there isn't much to change. Give it a few seconds. There we go. All right, it's settled. Again, freeze it and make a clone over. Now unfreeze this one. Also make sure you removed the linked editing. And now, if I go ahead and simulate this thing, since all of these places that have these buttons are basically sewn to the base and this thing has pressure on it, it will naturally try to get more inflated and give us that look like we saw in our image. So if this doesn't inflate like this, we're going to have to increase the pressure and give it a bit more shrinkage, weft, and warp. So let's try 115. All right. Actually, let's just go ahead and try by changing the type for the fabric. So for cotton in this case doesn't really work. So let's try something else and see how that thing is going to look like. All right, not linen. Let's try with something like the knit terry. All right, that's gonna, oh, there we go. All right, so we have this sort of a look now. Now the thing here is that if I were trying to get some more wrinkles here, I would probably go in, increase the particle distance, and play around with the settings for my fabric. But in this case, even with just a small adjustment like this, where we have more geometry to do the simulations, we're going to see a bit more of that look. There we go. Now also what we can do is we can basically get both of these looks mixed up by going in, putting in an internal line and going from one side to the other. So let's try one of these guys. So one internal line from there goes all the way down to here and down to there. All right, hit enter. And since this is an internal line and not a baseline, we can see it over here. And if I restart the synchronization, now we're going to see this slowly appearing in our model. Let's deselect it. There we go. We can see a very faint look over here. But now, if I want to have this thing be much more visible, what I can do is I can turn this into an elastic. So we haven't talked about this yet. So once you have your internal lines, you can turn them into an elastic. Or also you can increase the fold strength. So if I go in and increase this fold strength, right away it's going to propagate in here. Increase the fold angle, and there we go. We just got this sort of a look that we can see in here. Now if we control this thing even more by tweaking these, either the fold strength and the fold angle, we can get much sharper cuts. So at 360 you can see that this thing kind of starts to be a bit of a problem. So let's give it a 330. It's no longer giving me that weird problem that it had in the middle here. So if we go and create this thing as an elastic, it will try to shrink this, but that's going to give us a different sort of a problem. So for now I'm going to turn it off. So with using internal lines, you can basically get whatever shape you're trying to achieve in here. In this case we just got this one, but if we go across the whole thing, we can basically get it to be that zigzag, and where we want to have this thing come to the base, something like we had in this case over here, we can do it very easy. Just click down to the and all the way down. So click and enter. The way that you create your internal lines is also going to be very dependent on your properties. So each internal line is going to have its own properties. So as you can see, these ones have a full strength of 12 and 330. Let's put this same here, 12 and 330. And just hit the rendering one more time. And right away we're going to see this thing propagate here. There we go. So very similar to what we're seeing in here. And if we spend a bit more time and do some math on how far this thing is supposed to go, then we're really gonna be able to get the same look and the same result. And also another thing is that once we actually go ahead and export this thing into 3ds Max, all of these holes we can put on a button that's going to cover this. Now there is another way to do the buttons in Marvelous Designer, but I'm actually going to leave that for a future video where we're going to cover this thing in more depth. And with this, we are basically finished with this 4th introductory video into the ways that Marvelous Designer works. So I hope you guys had fun and you managed to learn something new from this video. If you would like to support me, you can click on the join button and the direct links will be in the description below. And the most helpful thing you can do is still just click the like and subscribe buttons if you are not a subscriber yet, and comment below in the videos. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next videos. Bye bye.